It is just after midnight. Deep underground, near Moscow, one man sits alone in a concrete bunker. His job is simple: watch the sky, wait for the end of the world. For hours, nothing moves, and then the alarm screams. A sign on the wall lights up bright red. One word: launch. On this night, the fate of the entire world will rest on one man and a decision he has only minutes to make. Some people change the world, and the world never learns their name. This is without whom. His name is Stanislav Petrov. He is an officer in the Soviet army, an engineer, calm and careful. Tonight he is in charge of one of the most important rooms in the country. Around him, screens glow in the dark. They are linked to satellites high above the earth, satellites that watch the United States, waiting to catch the bright flash of a missile launch. If the missiles ever came, this quiet room would be the very first to know. To understand this night, you have to understand the year. 1983 may be the most dangerous year of the entire Cold War. Two great powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, each held enough nuclear weapons to end human life many times over. Trust between them had almost completely collapsed. Each side watched the other across the world, certain that an attack could come at any moment, day or night. In Moscow, the fear ran deep. Soviet leaders had become convinced that America was preparing a secret first strike, a surprise attack, meant to wipe them out before they could fire back. So they made a plan. Watch closely for any sign of it, and if an attack ever seemed to begin, do not wait and do not hesitate. Strike back with everything you have before it is too late. And then, just weeks before this night, it got far worse. A Korean passenger plane drifted off course into Soviet airspace. Fighters were sent up to meet it. They shot it down. All 269 people on board were killed. The world recoiled in horror. Anger boiled over on both sides. The two superpowers were now closer to open war than they had been in 20 years. The fuse was lit. That is the world Stanislav Petrov carried with him as he began his shift that night. 12 long hours in the dark. The first hours passed slowly and quietly. Just the hum of the machines and the soft glow of the screens. He had sat through nights like this many times before. Nothing ever happened. Nothing was supposed to happen. And then, in an instant, everything changed. A siren tore through the room. On the wall, a panel lit up in bright red letters. Launch. The computer was certain. It reported that the United States had fired a nuclear missile, and that missile was already climbing into the sky, heading straight for the Soviet Union. Petrov went still. Every alarm in that room was telling him the same impossible thing. The war had just begun. His orders were clear. The moment he saw a launch, he was to pick up the phone and warn his commanders. From there, the alarm would race up the chain of command, all the way to the very top. And the Soviet plan was to answer a launch with a launch. If he passed this warning on, he could help set off an attack that no one on Earth would be able to call back. But something did not feel right. Petrov knew how a real attack should look. If America truly wanted to destroy the Soviet Union, it would not send a single missile. It would send hundreds all at once, a massive wave built to leave no chance of a reply. One lonely missile made no sense to him. Why would anyone choose to start the end of the world with just one? He had only seconds to think. And then the board changed again. One missile became two. Two became five. 5 nuclear missiles, the computer insisted, all in the air, all aimed at his country. The soldiers around him began to panic. The machine was now screaming that a full attack was underway. Every rule, every order, every instinct trained into him said the same thing. Report it. Report it now. But Petrov hesitated. He stared at the screens. He had no way to be sure. He could not see the missiles with his own eyes. He could only trust the computer, or trust himself. If he stayed silent and he was wrong, the first proof of his mistake would be nuclear fire falling on his cities. If he passed it on and the computer was wrong, he might start the very war he was so afraid of. So he waited out. Fast. The warning system was new. He did not fully trust it. And there was something else. The ground radar stations, the ones that scanned the horizon for real missiles, had seen nothing at all. If a true attack were coming, surely they would have caught something by now. Only the satellites were sounding the alarm. To Petrov, this was beginning to feel less like an attack and more like a mistake. And so he made his choice. He picked up the phone, called his commanders, and told them it was a false alarm. A system error. No attack. He said it with a steady, confident voice. But inside, he later admitted, he was far from certain. He guessed the odds were no better than 50-50. He had just bet the lives of millions of people on his own judgment, and nothing else. Now there was nothing left to do but wait. If he was wrong, the missiles would arrive in minutes, so he watched the clock. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5. The whole room held its breath, waiting for the ground radar to light up, waiting for the first distant explosion to tell them all that he had made the worst mistake in human history. The seconds crawled by, and then the minutes passed, and nothing happened. No missiles, no explosions, no war. The skies over the Soviet Union stayed silent and empty. Stanislav Petrov had been right. There was no attack. The most advanced warning system in the country had been wrong, and one tired man, trusting his gut over a machine, had quietly refused to believe it. So what had really happened? In time, investigators found the answer, and it was almost unbelievable. It was the sun. On that autumn night, sunlight had bounced off the tops of high clouds at just the right angle, lining up perfectly with the satellites in orbit. The system mistook that flash of sunlight for the fire of launching missiles. The end of the world, it turned out, had been a trick of the light. You might expect Stanislav Petrov to be called a hero. He was not. At first, his commanders praised him. He was even promised a reward, but the reward never came. Instead, he was questioned again and again about every choice he had made that night. And in the end, he was quietly scolded. Not for his decision, but on a technicality. He had not filled out his paperwork properly during the crisis. The real reason was simpler. To honor Petrov, the army would have to admit that its brand new system had failed, that the powerful scientists and officers behind it had made a dangerous mistake. It was far easier to stay silent. So Petrov was moved to a lower post. He soon left the army for good, and the strain of that single night stayed with him quietly for years, and the whole story stayed buried. For more than a decade, the world had no idea how close it had come. It was only in the late 1990s that the truth finally came out. Late in his life, Petrov was honored at the United Nations and given quiet peace awards abroad. But he never saw himself as a hero. He said he was simply the right man, in the right place, at the right time. He died with little fanfare in 2017. Historians still debate just how close the world truly came that night. Perhaps others up the chain would have stopped it too. Perhaps not. We will never know for certain. But this much is true. On the night the machines called for war, One man chose to trust himself instead of the alarm. His name was Stanislav Petrov. The world you live in was built by people you have never heard of. And now, you know one more name. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more videos on Without Whom.